Living alone, especially if you're a bit out of the way, you get pretty cautious about who you open your door to, right? Oh man, there I go again with the questions. What I mean is, you develop this sort of sixth sense for when something's not quite right. I thought I had that sense pretty well honed. But this one guy, he almost got past all my defenses. Showed up on my doorstep one afternoon, looking for all the world like a concerned neighbor. But the more he talked, the colder my blood ran. Or, the more unsettled I got. My little house is at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. Backs up onto a small patch of woods. Not super isolated, but definitely not a lot of through traffic. I was home working on my laptop in the living room when the doorbell rang. Wasn't expecting anyone. Looked through the peephole. Saw a guy I didn't recognize. Maybe late 40s, early 50s. Dressed neatly, clean jeans, a collared shirt. Looked normal, concerned, even. I opened the door just a crack, leaving the chain on. Yes? Afternoon, he said, his voice calm, polite. Sorry to bother you. I live just over on Elm Street, a couple of blocks over. Name's David. He gestured vaguely behind him. I was just walking my dog past the woods back there, and I saw something a bit unusual near the back of your property. Thought I should let you know. My internal alarm bells gave a tiny, hesitant tingle. Unusual? Like what? Well, he said, leaning in a little, lowering his voice conspiratorially. It looked like maybe one of your back windows, the one on the ground floor, might be open, or at least not properly latched. And I thought I saw someone, just a glimpse, sort of ducking away into the trees back there when I got closer. Probably nothing, but, with all the break-ins in the county lately. Better safe than sorry, right? Break-ins? I hadn't heard about any break-ins. And I was pretty sure all my windows were closed and locked. But he sounded so genuine, so concerned. And the thought of someone lurking in the woods behind my house? That was definitely unsettling. Oh, wow. Thanks for letting me know, I said, feeling a bit flustered. I should probably check that. Exactly, he said, nodding earnestly. Look, I don't want to impose, but if you'd like, I can walk around back with you. Just to be sure everything's secure. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, especially if there was someone back there. Now, this is where I should have said, no thanks, I got it. Closed the door. And maybe called a friend or even the non-emergency police line if I was really worried. But he seemed so helpful, so normal. And the idea of checking the back of the house alone. If there had been someone lurking, suddenly felt a lot scarier than letting this concerned neighbor walk around with me. He wasn't trying to get in the house, just walk around the outside. What harm could there be in that? That's actually really kind of you, I said, making it quick. And what I now realize was a very stupid decision. Yeah, okay. Let me just grab my phone. I unlatched the chain. He smiled, a polite, neighborly smile. No problem at all. Always good to look out for each other. We walked around the side of the house towards the back. He kept up a stream of pleasant, normal chatter. Asked about how long I'd lived here. Commented on my struggling rose bushes. All very mundane. We got to the back. I checked all the ground floor windows. All closed. All locked. No sign of any forced entry. I said, confused. They all seem secure to me. He peered closely at one of them. This one here, he said, pointing to the kitchen window. The latch looks a little loose from this angle. Might be worth getting that checked out. Easy for someone to jimmy that with a screwdriver. He leaned in even closer, almost pressing his face to the glass, cupping his hands around his eyes to see inside. Everything look okay in there? Nothing out of place? Yeah, looks fine, I said, starting to feel a new kind of unease. His concern was starting to feel a little too intense. Too focused? Why was he so interested in my window latches, in what was inside my kitchen? Good, good, he said, straightening up. Well, probably just a false alarm then. Maybe it was just some kids cutting through the woods. Glad everything's okay. He smiled again. While I'm here, mind if I just use your restroom real quick? Long walk. And there it was. The request to come inside. After all the just checking the outside talk. My alarm bells were clanging loud and clear now. This felt wrong. This felt like a setup. Actually, I stammered, trying to think fast. I'm really sorry. But the plumbing's been acting up. It's a bit of a mess in there right now. Probably best not. Lame excuse, I know. His smile didn't change, but his eyes, they seemed to harden just for a fraction of a second. Oh, right. No problem at all, he said, his voice still perfectly pleasant. Well, glad I could be of some help, or at least ease your mind. You take care now. He gave a little wave, turned, and walked back around the side of the house towards the street. I didn't follow him, just stood there in my backyard, heart pounding, feeling like an absolute idiot. Waited until I heard his footsteps fade away on the sidewalk out front. Then I rushed back inside, locked the door, bolted it, checked every single window again. The escape, the resolution, was him leaving, me not letting him in. The immediate threat, whatever it might have been, was averted. But the feeling that lingered, it was awful. Had he been genuine? Just an overly concerned, slightly odd neighbor? Or was it something more sinister? Was he casing my house? Testing my defenses? Trying to see if I was an easy target? The break-ins in the county line? Was that real or just part of his story to get me to lower my guard? I spent the rest of the day feeling jumpy, paranoid. Kept looking out the windows, expecting to see him watching from the street or from the edge of the woods. Saw nothing. But the feeling of my home, my safe space, having been potentially compromised by my own momentary lapse in judgment, that was hard to shake. I never saw David from Elm Street again. I asked a few actual neighbors later if they knew him. No one did. Was he even from this area? Or just someone passing through, looking for an opportunity? The questions are what haunt me. It makes you realize how easily someone can manipulate a situation, use your own sense of politeness or fear against you. And it makes you wonder how many other helpful strangers are out there knocking on doors. Their true intentions hidden behind a concerned smile and a plausible story. It definitely made me a lot less trusting, a lot more inclined to just keep the door chained, no matter how normal someone seems. Some uninvited guests don't need to force their way in. Sometimes you almost invite them yourself. Moving into a new house, especially one in a quiet, leafy suburb, you expect a certain period of settling in. Getting used to the new sounds, the new neighbors, the quirks of an older house. I just bought this little place on Maple Street. My first house. Super exciting. It had a decent-sized backyard, a bit overgrown and neglected by the previous owners, but with good potential. I figured I'd tackle the yard work in a few weeks once I got the inside sorted. I didn't count on someone else apparently deciding to take on the gardening duties for me at night, and their choice of plants was, well, let's just say it wasn't roses. The first few nights were normal, unpacking boxes, figuring out where everything went. The neighborhood was incredibly quiet after dark. Almost eerily so after living in a noisy apartment building for years. Around the third or fourth night, I was up late trying to assemble some flat pack furniture in the living room, which overlooked the backyard. That's when I first heard it. A soft, rhythmic sound from outside. Scrape, scrape, pause, scrape. Like someone using a small hand trowel, or maybe just their hands to dig in soft earth. I muted the TV, listened. It was definitely coming from my backyard. My first thought was animals. Raccoons are notorious around here, always digging up lawns looking for grubs, or maybe a stray dog. I crept to the window, peered out through a gap in the blinds. The backyard was mostly dark, just some faint moonlight filtering through the trees. Couldn't see anything clearly. The scraping sound continued for a few more minutes, then stopped. I shrugged it off. Probably just raccoons, but the next night it happened again. Same time, around same soft, rhythmic scraping. And this time I thought I heard a very faint, low humming or muttering sound with it. Too indistinct to be words. That was weirder. Raccoons don't usually hum while they dig. The following morning, I went out to inspect the backyard. The overgrown patch at the very back, near the old wooden fence bordering the woods, looked different. The weeds were disturbed in a few small, specific spots. And in one of those spots, someone had planted something. Not a flower, not a vegetable. It looked like a stick. Just a plain, straight stick about 2 feet long, pushed firmly into the earth. And tied to the top of it was a small, faded piece of red cloth. Okay, now this was officially strange. This wasn't animal activity. This was human. Someone had been in my backyard in the middle of the night, digging and planting weird little stick markers. Kids messing around. Some bizarre neighborhood prank. It felt more unsettling than that. The red cloth gave it a weird, almost ritualistic vibe. I pulled the stick out, nothing else there. Just a hole in the ground. I spent the rest of the day feeling uneasy, constantly glancing out at the backyard. That night, I decided I was going to try and see who it was. I turned off all the lights in the back of the house, sat in a dark living room by the window, waiting. Around 1:30 I saw it. A flicker of movement at the far end of the yard, near the fence. Then a very faint, very small beam of light, like from a tiny pen light, bobbing around. Someone was out there. Dressed in dark clothing, hard to make out any details. They were kneeling on the ground in that same disturbed patch, digging again with a small trowel. Slowly, methodically. My heart was hammering. What should I do? Yell? Call the police? I was alone in the house? What if they were dangerous? I just stayed frozen, watching. After a few minutes of digging, they seemed to place something small into the hole they'd made, then carefully covered it up. Then they moved to another spot, started digging again. They were planting things. But what? And why in my yard? This went on for maybe half an hour. They moved around that back patch, digging, planting, their movements quiet, efficient, almost like they'd done this many times before. I couldn't see what they were planting. Were they burying something they didn't want found? Stolen goods? Evidence of something worse? This quiet suburban backyard suddenly felt like it could be a drop point for something really shady. Finally, they seemed to finish. Stood up, swept their little light around the patch of ground one last time, then turned and melted back into the shadows towards the fence, disappearing into the woods beyond. They hadn't made a sound, other than the soft digging. I waited until I was sure they were gone, then waited some more. My hands were shaking, finally armed with a big kitchen knife. I went out into the backyard, my own flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Went straight to that patch of disturbed earth. What had they planted? I knelt down, started carefully digging with my hands where I'd seen them working. The earth was soft, freshly turned. About 6 inches down, my fingers hit something. Not a plant root, something hard and smooth. I pulled it out. It was a bone. A small animal bone. Looked like maybe from a bird or a squirrel, but it wasn't just a plain bone. It had been carved. Tiny, intricate symbols were etched all over its surface. And tied around one end, with a piece of black thread, was another small, faded red cloth, just like the one on the stick I'd found earlier. I dropped it like it was burning. What was this? Some kind of weird folk magic? A threat? A warning? I dug in another spot where they'd been. Found another carved bone, this one with a small, rusty metal ring pushed onto it. Then another. And another. The whole patch was full of them. Dozens of these small carved animal bones, each with a little red cloth or some other strange adornment. This wasn't just someone burying stolen goods. This felt ritualistic. Deeply, deeply creepy. And it was happening in my backyard. The escape, the resolution for that night, was me going back inside, locking every door and window, and not sleeping a wink. The next morning I called the police. I felt like an idiot trying to explain it. Someone's planting creepy carved bones in my garden at night. But the officer who came out actually took it pretty seriously. He looked at the bones, the disturbed earth, said it wasn't the first time he had reports of unusual nocturnal activity near the woods bordering that part of town. Didn't elaborate. He took the bones I dug up as evidence, told me to install motion sensor lights and call them immediately if I saw anyone again. I put up those lights the same day, big bright floodlights. And I started clearing that overgrown back patch, cutting everything down. The night gardener never came back, or at least I never saw any more signs of them. But the mystery of it, who were they? What was the purpose of those carved bones, those rituals? Were they just some harmless eccentric? Or part of something more organized, more sinister, using the cover of quiet suburban nights and overgrown backyards for their strange purposes? The questions linger. It made me realize that sometimes the most unsettling guests aren't the ones who come through your front door. Sometimes they're the ones who visit your garden in the dead of night, leaving behind secrets buried just beneath the surface. You know, when you go away on vacation, leaving your house in someone else's hands, you put a lot of trust in that person. Even if it's someone you kind of know or someone who comes recommended, you just hope they'll water the plants, feed the cat, not throw any wild parties. You don't expect them to be doing what I think the house sitter I hired last summer was doing. It wasn't about what she took. It was about what she was looking for, and that's way creepier, if you ask me. I was going away for 2 weeks, a much needed break. My usual cat sitter was unavailable. A friend of a friend recommended this woman, Lena. Met her once, briefly. Seemed okay. A bit quiet, maybe a little intense in her gaze, but responsible enough, I thought. Gave her the keys, showed her the cat food, the alarm system basics. Off I went. Came back 2 weeks later, tanned and relaxed. The apartment looked fine. Cat was happy. Plants were watered. Lena had left the key on the counter with a polite little note. Everything seemed perfectly normal for about a day. Then I started noticing little things. Tiny things. So small you'd think I was imagining them. A book on my bookshelf, one I hadn't touched in ages, was pulled out just a fraction of an inch further than the others. The spare toiletries in the bathroom cabinet looked like they'd been rearranged, not used, just moved around slightly. My desk drawer, the one where I keep old papers and stuff, felt like it didn't close quite as smoothly as it used to, like something inside had been shifted. Am I crazy? I started asking myself. Am I just being paranoid after being away? It's easy to forget exactly how you left things, but the feeling persisted. It was like someone had been exploring, not ransacking, not stealing, just looking quietly, methodically. Then I checked my computer. I usually leave it on in sleep mode. The browser history, it had been cleared completely. Now, Lena had no reason to use my main computer. I'd left my old laptop out for her if she needed internet. Why clear my history? Unless she'd been looking at things she didn't want me to know she'd looked at. That's when the real unease started to set in. This wasn't just someone being a bit nosy. This felt targeted. I started looking around more carefully. In my home office, I have a small, locked filing cabinet where I keep important documents. Old tax returns, insurance papers. Nothing super sensitive, but private. The lock looked fine. But then I noticed a tiny, almost invisible scratch right near the keyhole. A scratch I was sure hadn't been there before. Had she tried to pick it? Or had she somehow found the spare key I keep hidden in a completely different room? That feeling of being subtly violated, of someone probing into your life with unknown intentions, started to get really strong. What was she looking for? Money? Valuables? I did a quick check. Nothing obvious was missing. Jewelry still there. Emergency cash still tucked away. So, what then? Information. I decided to check my router logs. I'm a bit of a tech nerd, so I know how. And what I found made my stomach clench. During the 2 weeks I was gone, there had been numerous connections to my Wi-Fi from an unrecognized device. And a lot of internet traffic late at night, going to some very specific, very strange websites. Not illegal stuff, not overtly. But sites related to high security locks. Schematics for alarm systems similar to mine. Forums discussing, well, let's just say covert entry techniques. And searches for information about my immediate neighbors. Their names, their professions, even property records for their apartments. This wasn't just a nosy house sitter. This was someone doing reconnaissance. Someone gathering intelligence. But for what? A future burglary? Targeting? Or using my apartment as a base to gather info on my wealthier neighbors? The possibilities were all terrifying. I felt sick. My safe, secure apartment suddenly felt completely exposed, compromised. She'd had 2 weeks in here, unfettered access. Knew my routines, knew where I kept things, had access to my Wi-Fi, my computer. What else had she looked at? What else did she find out? The escape, the resolution, was immediate and frantic. I called a locksmith that very day, had every lock in the apartment changed. I installed a couple of small hidden security cameras. I did a deep dive on my computer, looking for any spyware or keyloggers. I even spoke to my building superintendent, vaguely mentioning suspicious activity and asking about any other recent issues in the building. He hadn't heard of anything. I never contacted Lena again. Never confronted her. What could I say? Hey, why were you researching my neighbor's alarm system? She'd deny it, of course, and I had no concrete proof she'd actually done anything illegal yet. Just a mountain of deeply unsettling circumstantial evidence. But the lingering feeling, that's the worst part. The sense of betrayal of my private space being so thoroughly, quietly invaded. The paranoia of wondering what information she gathered and what she might plan to do with it, or who she might have been working for. Was my apartment just a convenient base for a larger criminal operation? Or was I, or one of my neighbors, a specific target? The questions are a constant, low hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. It makes you realize that sometimes the most dangerous uninvited guests aren't the ones who break down your door. They're the ones you willingly hand the keys to. The ones who smile politely while they quietly map out your life and your vulnerabilities for reasons you may never discover.